Hello, my sweet strangelings. Welcome to Mystic Mondays. Today we have a very special guest, Mystic Dylan. He is a author, a witch, a shop owner, and a tarot reader, an entrepreneur, so many things. And I'm excited to have him on today's episode. It is so educational, so entertaining. He is such a fun person to be around, and I hope that you guys check out his work. So without further ado, hi everybody, welcome to Getting Strange with Stephanie Strange, and we have a very special guest, Dylan, but you're also known as Mystic Dylan online.
Mystic Dylan.
Mystic Dylan. And we're going to be talking about witchcraft in the media. Also, Dylan is a writer. He also helped with other fun projects that we'll get into.
Let's get strange.
Let's get strange. Let's get supernatural.
Let's get supernatural.
So also, if you guys are watching the video, we are at Wolf and Jackal, formerly known as the Old Emporium.
The Old World Emporium.
The Old World Emporium.
Then Old World Apothecary. We've had so many
different names.
names.
Yeah. So we're also here in Santa Clarita. So Dylan, can you tell the audience a little bit about like your background and what got you started having a shop and in witchcraft and stuff?
Woof. So I grew up, I had like a very turbulent childhood. I'm not gonna say depressing, but turbulent. I went back and forth between California, and I grew up in South Florida.
Oh yeah.
Growing up in South Florida, my grandmother was Cuban, and I grew up in a very Cuban neighborhood, so there were always botanicas everywhere.
Yeah.
This sounds really bad, but it was our toy store. So I remember going in there early, and they had cards, and there were things about magic, and you would see cauldrons. Young Dylan is so different from Dylan now.
Yeah.
Baby Dylan really liked being outside, whereas right now, if I'm outside more than 5 minutes, I want to throw up. But there was a part of me that was always barefoot, and my grandmother lived on a lake, so I used to catch frogs and wear lizards on my ear. I don't know if you ever did that. That's not
Lizards on your ear. No, I never did
no.
that. Wait, you have
So
to show
if
pictures.
yes. So if you catch a lizard, I'm sure there's gonna be some PETA person listening to this that's oh my God. But if
Yeah.
you catch a lizard and you put it on your ear, they bite your ear and they hang.
Oh
on
my
your ear.
gosh.
Yeah. So I'd wear it as an earring. I was really cool. Anyway,
Were they alive?
Yeah, they were alive, and they would just chill.
Okay.
They'd be like snap, and they would just hang. I think between all that, I already had this connection to nature and animals, and I was very swampy. I loved alligators as a kid. So long story short, when I moved to California, my mom was very into holistic healing and essential oils.
Yeah.
So we would go to these metaphysical stores, and she'd be looking at the oils, and I'd be looking at the bones and the tarot cards and stuff. So I think at a very young age, I was attracted to this idea of spiritualism and magic. And my mother got me a tarot deck at 10 years old.
And for context too, because I know your mom.
Right.
I don't think the audience knows who your mom is. So is your mom's, is she white? What is
Yeah.
she?
No, yeah. My mom's white. She's,
But your
she's
grandmother was Cuban.
So
both
my
sides.
yeah. So my father's side is Cuban, German, Jew, Catholic. My mom's side is Cherokee and German, Irish, Scottish, white.
Okay.
It's a very mixed bag. But my mom is she's white, very grew up in California her whole life, California girl.
Okay.
And the whole LA new age woo woo,
New age woo-woo.
listen. So that was her. So she was going into shops. There was a shop that was by us that closed called the Bodhi Tree, and she would get her lavender oil to sleep. But then they had tarot decks, and they had crystals, and they had pendulums, and they had spirit boards. So I'd be hanging out in that section. So she got me a tarot deck when I was 10. And I started learning tarot, and I became fascinated. The
Yeah.
idea of
How old were
fortune
you by this
telling,
point?
10.
10. Wow.
So
okay.
I think before witchcraft, it was fortune telling. I really liked the idea of reading cards and
Yeah.
knowing the future.
And can you explain to the audience? I mean, I know what the difference is, but difference between fortune telling and just tarot and psychic work.
I think fortune telling is more the to me, when I think fortune telling, I think like the fun aspect. Like you go to a carnival, like yes, you get a tarot card reading, but it's a little less, it's more on the kitschy side, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, also I feel like fortune telling, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like I also perceived it as like fortune telling is like your future is set in stone.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think there's more emphasis on this will happen. You're going to meet
Yeah.
this person. Fate is fixed. So, like, that's kind of what I got into. And then once I expanded on that, like, really, I started, like, using a lot of my practice is twofold. Like I have a very traditional witchcraft practice, and then I really rely heavily on the folk practice. So like the grandmother and like what she kind of told me and like what my mom has told me. So I kind of have this idea of that. So technically you would say that my practice is a little eclectic, even though I think it's a little more structured. I lived in Louisiana.
Yeah.
So like that kind of like that shaped my practice. And then I was also an anthropology major. So like
Oh, wow.
I love Egypt and Greece and Rome. And so a lot of that shapes my practice too. So it's hard because in my mind I have a set practice, but when
Yeah.
I try to explain it to you or a layman, people are like, you're all over the place. And I was like, I'm really not, I promise.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We're going to be talking about like the pulp culture aspects of witchcraft, and you kind of touched base on it with like fortune telling and the
Yeah.
misconceptions with witchcraft. And there's so many, and we've talked about this like even off this podcast, but that witchcraft is such a very expressionist way of spirituality in some aspects. And, you know, you own a shop, and you've told me in the past that people have walked into your shop and they've asked for items that just simply don't exist. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, absolutely. Because of pop culture, there are a lot of books that just don't exist. So we get asked a lot if we carry the Necronomicon.
Okay.
Okay.
And can you explain to people where that comes from?
I believe it's H.P. Lovecraft, or I think there are two. There's there's the H.P. Lovecraft Necronomicon, then there's like the Necronomicon Book of the Dead from Evil Dead.
Or like the mummy.
Or the mummy, right? So
Yeah.
you have like the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So the only one that's really real is the Egyptian Book of the Dead, but the Egyptian Book of the Dead is not the Book of the Dead that you're reading in the mummy.
Right.
You know, like it's
Yeah.
very different. But like the H.P. Lovecraft Necronomicon, that's made up. He didn't even write one, by the way. So for fun fact, I think there are H.P. Lovecraft. I think there are 3 or 2 that are published, and they're like H.P. Lovecraft like fans that have also kind of tried to revive the religion of H.P. Lovecraft or whatever.
Oh,
So
yeah.
like there are books where you can like conjure Cthulhu. Then like the Evil Dead Necronomicon. And then the other one that people ask for, the Charmed Book of Shadows.
Oh, the Book of Shadows.
Yeah.
Well, like, don't you have like a
Like and we
grimoire?
do, yeah. A Book of Shadows is different from the Book of Shadows of Charmed, right? So
Yeah.
the Book of Shadows of Charmed is like a collection of spells to fight demons.
Yeah.
You know, and then I think it gives you like like I haven't seen Charmed in a minute, but then I think like every page is like a specific demon, like this is the demon
Yeah.
and how to like fight it, you know?
Yeah.
A Book of Shadows is kind of like a Wiccan, it's the book that Wiccans use to like contain their spells and rituals. So like there's that, and then there's
Like
like
their
a
own dictionary.
grimoire.
Or
Yeah, like their own
Wikipedia,
dictionary, or
but in book
yeah,
form.
or like a compendium that they put together.
Yeah.
So we get that all the time. Someone asked if we sold a basilisk fang. I
what
believe
is
that's
that?
from Harry Potter. I mean, like in mythology, there is a basilisk, but like yeah. So like we get it. When I first opened. And I will say, I almost thought about it. People were like, "Do you sell Birdie Bots every flavored beans?" And I was like,
Oh, from the Harry
"No."
Potter?
Yes,
Are you serious?
Swear. So like we've kind of had it all. It's what they've seen on pop culture. I'm sorry.
So they're getting
I've
all their
only been doing this
education.
15 years. Clearly, you know more.
They're getting all their education off of movies and
Yeah.
shows, and that's kind of crazy, actually.
You know, and the sad thing about it is that, like, honestly, it's twofold, right? There is a lot that I give credit to pop culture because I do think they pull.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes they do their work, and then sometimes it's like fantasy, and I think it's because they mix both. I think it makes it hard for the viewer because the viewer will be like, oh well, if if a book of shadows is real, then the charmed one is that book of shadows,
Oh, I
but
see
it's
what you're
not.
saying.
Does that make
Because
sense?
like the names I'm similar.
Exactly.
But like, okay, so here's my thing on this too, like media literacy, right? Like I feel like most people can discern that like zombies, for the most
Uh-huh.
part, it's just not reality. But if you look at like I think in Haitian
Yeah,
practices,
and Haitian voodoo.
they have a form of a zombie. It's just not the way that the mainstream is portrayed. So I
Correct.
think like at least in my perception, most people have like that common sense that those are distinct things, but we're not seeing enough media literacy when it comes to witchcraft. And well, this is also segueing into the Mayfair witches. And like they reached out to you to consult Mayfair
Yeah.
witches. And what was that experience like?
Well, one, it was exciting in the sense that like I've always been a fan of Anne Rice. Like I
Oh,
love
I love
Interview
Anne
with the
Rice. Yeah.
Vampire. I love, the Witching Hour books. Like were really cool, and I think it was a really cool experience because it was something that had affected me as like a kid
Yeah.
to be part of. But what I will say, and like I love the showrunners. I love what they do. They very much are open to what I have to say. But at the end of the day, right? It's fantasy and they have their show and they have to cater to the audience and what's going to be woo, right?
Yeah.
So like I can't share anything of this upcoming season that got renewed, but I definitely will say so like from page to screen, right? So like in one of the episodes they were like, what is a sigil that they can like draw and
Oh.
like, do this and blah blah blah. So I went through the sigil and I went through the ritual and like long story short, it was very different. Because they had to go a more, I don't want to say magical, but they had to go a more fantasy way.
Okay.
But they definitely did take into consideration what I was saying. So like I think the experience is knowing like I can't take it personal. They can listen, they take what they want, and then they go.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I do have respect for them in that way because technically they didn't have to consult me. They could have just Googled.
Right.
And I know a lot of shows that do.
Yes.
And I do feel that you can tell when you watch a show, you can tell who is Googling and who is consulting.
Yeah, because not everyone can Google efficiently.
Exactly. Right?
That sounds sad, but
Yeah, I mean, it does sound sad, but like, and there's so much information on Google, right?
Right.
So like, who are you going to trust? Like, for shits and giggles, I went down like a Reddit of like traditional witchcraft.
oh my gosh.
Everyone has their own view of what they think traditional witchcraft is, so it's things like that. And I think that's why you need valid sources and people can be like, well, what makes Mystic Dylan a valid source? And I was like, well, I've studied this, right? So like, not only have I studied this for 15 years and I look at the historical aspects as well, I'm also following through with the practice.
Right.
But yeah, I think Mayfair Witches was a really fun experience because one, it was also really cool to watch this series and be like, that was me. That was me. I did that.
Well, kind of backpedaling a little bit. So, how can people discern whether you are a specialist or Joe Schmo on the internet is? And I think that's a really important thing. Is like I always tell people when they're dabbling into wanting to get into the metaphysical is like go to your local shop. I really can't emphasize that enough. I think that it's not enough, like you said, to Google it. You really have to visit your local community. And where do you start? It's through the local shops, like your metaphysical
Absolutely.
shops. And I think that that's kind of how I found you. I was like, well, when I moved out here, I was like, I'm gonna find a like metaphysical occult shop or something like that nearby me. And this was like one of the first ones that popped up, and that's kind of how I ended up here. And I always tell people like you can read books, you can do that, but it's so different than like being in person with somebody that's been doing it.
Absolutely. And doesn't it make you feel like, so for me, it makes me feel there's a validation or less crazy. Does that make sense? So like I'll never forget like one of the first books, and I always tell people it's like Mastering Witchcraft by Paul Hewson. And I remember reading this book and being like, there's no fucking way that people are doing this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Like I'm
yeah,
like, this is some, and then you talk to someone, they're like, so like I did a circle, and they're like, wait, you did one too? And like you lit a candle on the full moon, and I'm not like, because when you read books, like yes, they can tell you what to do, but there's nothing like talking to someone who's like, oh, I did that and this is what I feel.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Oh, and also, you guys, I don't mean to put Dylan on blast on here, but like, so we went to Barnes and Noble recently.
Damn.
We went to Barnes and Noble recently, and you actually went as far as to look at the footnotes. So, like, just if you guys like doubt what you're saying, like, I literally witnessed him going to Barnes and Noble and looking at the footnotes. And what did you do after that? You can share what you did after that.
What did I do?
You wrote an email.
Oh, that's right. I did. I did write an email. So, like, here's the thing. I did. I get very mad. I get very mad. So, like, unfortunately, I feel like we are in a day and age where you can write whatever the hell you want, you know? And there was a book that shall not be named.
So they were saying that these things were not closed
We're
practice,
not closed
but
practices.
They are.
But they are.
Yeah.
And it was very weird.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? So like I wrote an email because I'm that type of person.
So like the AMC team did a good job by hiring you to consult because you
Yes.
do check footnotes.
Absolutely.
Like,
And I would also say too, like I don't know if this was a question you were gonna ask later, but if you are discovering your practice and when you do get a book on witchcraft, be like, what are the footnotes? What are the recommendations? Where are they getting their sources? If you are doing something, you should study something and figure out why.
right.
They'll tell you the how, but they won't tell you the why. You know, why are we using this root? Why are we using this herb?
Yeah.
You know, I think all those things are very important.
I know there's going to be some people that are like, well, not everything has a footnote, not everything can be traced. But like, here's an example. Like, I rather have somebody tell me that like the way that they are picking up a message is through their psychic work than make up some stuff that they saw on like Cosmopolitan. You know what I mean? You see a lot of these people reference like a very, not even like an actual academic resource
No.
or somebody that studied it. Because they feel like they have the pressure to add some type of footnote. They'll add like Cosmopolitan or like Wikipedia, and it's like,
Yes.
dude, just say that you were a psych, you channeled this in some way, or you
Exactly.
believe this in your opinion,
Right.
because it also shows like the passion and like what you've done and what you've been exposed to. That's the way you can also
Exactly.
be like, you know, have some type of like backup to your claim. Anyway, so I know we got off tangent. This does kind of play a part with like mainstream and pulp culture because like witches, as we know, are not portrayed rightfully so. And I think people sensationalize witchcraft, and that's how you get these
Absolutely.
people, like I said, that like they'll go on Cosmopolitan or
Yes.
nothing bad with Cosmopolitan, but it's not an academic source for witchcraft. You know what I mean? Or Wikipedia or whatever. Because I think of Cosmopolitan as like when they have like the astrology,
But it's so funny you brought that up because I was gonna. That reminds me, like recently, and not to bash anyone. Maybe it is here to put people on blast.
Yeah.
But I met someone who recently said they just started doing professional psychic readings because they took an online quiz and it told them they were psychic.
Oh no.
And I was like, say what?
But you need to practice. But here's the thing. So I'm a content creator. We both do content,
Right.
and I've met people also. And for context, some of you might be like, well, how is psychic ship? It is. It's an adjacent to witchcraft. That's a whole other podcast in itself. But I have met people that are like, well, you know, I've known this my whole life, and they're using the wrong terminology. Here's my take: you can't be a medium and not a psychic. And I hear a lot of these like content creators.
Yes.
They're like, I'm a medium and da 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 da, but I'm not a psychic. I'm like, that's impossible.
Right. Or they say that they're a medium and they don't know what the term medium means. I think that people are born with inherent skills. Absolutely. Here's what I see a lot of people doing though. They are so committed to their intuition and refusing to learn
Yeah.
that
That's ego though.
it's ego. And that is one of the things, and I see a lot with witches. I see a lot with other people. One of the things that I want to bring up, though, when you were talking about like the stereotypes of witches, I'm seeing this now too. And as Stephanie knows, you know, I'm a bit of a controversial witch in the witch community.
I feel like all witches are at this point.
Yes, but I think there is such a fear of witchcraft being perceived as dark. That witches are doing the most. So they're using terms like I am a white witch, I am a good witch.
Oh my gosh.
I am a white light witch. And they go towards the good, the positive, the positive.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I feel that negates the truth of witchcraft.
I've never believed in like this very like black and white mentality, and witchcraft isn't supposed to be about that. It's supposed to be the energy around you and how you
Yeah.
perceive the energy around you, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. And
And
we'll
so,
also, not to interrupt
no, go
you,
ahead.
but
Yeah.
to go off that, it's like think of one of the titles of witchcraft is called The Crooked Path. Because it is not in one, there's something to be said by the fact that Abrahamic religions
Yeah.
put an emphasis on good and
And bad.
evil. If you look at Buddhism, if you look at Eastern, if you look at ancient traditions, there is chaos and there is, things like that. But the whole good and bad is a very Abrahamic concept. With that being said, though, I think the craft is a wonderful example because it's not necessarily good and bad, right? So it's like selfish and taking power to the extreme. She wants control. She wants the most. She's siphoning energies from everyone. And what I like about the craft is that it teaches a good lesson.
Do you know that the internet or TikTok in particular, there's a lot of videos going around that Sarah was really the villain. And I know like, because we were talking about like good and bad, good versus evil and all this stuff, and the craft has somewhat of a depiction on this. And when I saw the TikTok of like Sarah and really what it means to be in a coven, I realized that they had a point.
I mean, okay. So yes. And I saw the video too.
Yeah,
Thanks for,
we
thanks
came,
for sharing.
yeah, we just
watched
came
it.
back.
We took a break. So all the other girls have issues and scenarios that they utilize their magic for. Okay.
To regain power.
To regain power or they have issues.
So I think it was Bonnie wants the
That's
scars
right.
removed.
Bonnie wants the scars removed.
Rochelle's dealing with
Rochelle, down with the racism, like valid wants. Now, what I will say about the only difference is that like Nancy does want like all the power, right? So
She gets
wants
two in her head.
She wants all the power, and then Sarah wants what's his face to love him. But like if you're looking at the craft as witchcraft, even though there are Wiccan elements, love magic is not all hearts and giggles,
No.
and you have to be specific when you cast a spell, and you have to be specific about what you want. So when she says, I want someone to love me, when she goes, I want this man to love me, she already had an issue with him where he fucked her over. And she was like, I want him to be obsessed with me. She really got what she wanted, like the magic worked, maybe not in her favor, but she got what she wanted. You have to be specific when you do the craft. Do I think she's a villain because she didn't stand up for her coven? I think what happens in the coven stays in the coven. I do think she neglected Nancy's feelings.
She did, yeah. And I think that's what I was trying to say. Like she kind of gives pick me vibes in that way.
Yes. I think she neglected Nancy's feelings. First off, I really do feel like it's kind of like, you being like, oh, we're in a coven. I liked this boy. Or, well, before she joined the coven, she was like, on a friend level, if you were like, this is the guy that I dated, and he did me wrong, just knowing you, Stephanie, if I started dating that guy, I'm pretty sure you'd have different thoughts, even if you weren't with him and you're married and you moved on. Yeah. But you probably would be like, what the fuck?
It feels weird. Yeah, not checking in, and especially since he was such a jerk to Nancy.
Right.
I've heard his name.
So I do see that. Now, do I think villain is, the extreme? Because let me tell you, you've seen the last 10 minutes of The Craft. It is the most. The snakes and the roaches and the you need to kill yourself or unalive yourself or like slit your wrist, like that was extreme.
Yes.
Yes,
it was.
But at the end of the day, I think what that movie does show is that we get what we deserve. The energy you put out, you are going to receive. So Nancy has this need for control.
Right.
What happens to her at the end? She becomes controlled. Because she ends up in the insane asylum, strapped down.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I do think that all the girls learned their lesson.
Yeah.
I don't think there's definitely a villain scenario. What I will say is I do not think that, I wouldn't say that Sarah is a protagonist. She may be in the sense that of all the ones that learned their lessons, maybe Sarah's one that truly learned her lesson because she's like, I'm not going to utilize this anymore. Like, this really fucked me up. And all that.
But doesn't she make like the tree branch fall?
Oh, that's right. She's the only one who's able to keep her powers.
But that's what I'm saying. So like,
You know,
what's the
it's like-
lesson with that? So like, she uses magic or spells for
Right.
love, but she keeps her powers because she didn't kill somebody. And then like the witches that are very true to their coven and the morality, they
You're
lose
right.
their powers.
Oh shit. Let's open it up. What are your thoughts, people? Because no, I get your
That'll be the
I get
poll.
that. I get that. But then at the same time too, right? So like, what is for the coven? So like, I don't think going after Sarah and trying to unalive her.
No, I
was
don't
for the
agree with that
coven,
either.
Right?
No, yeah.
But like, maybe they all should have lost their powers.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Maybe
That
they
would've been the
all
lesson.
should. That would have been the lesson.
Yeah.
The lesson would be that they all lost their powers. You know. So yeah, I don't
Because-
see why is it so easy for Sarah to be redeemed and not the others.
Right, because like so kind of like let's just remove the ending because we all agree that's bad.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, leading up to where things took a really very outlandish twist, you know, all three girls before Sarah came in, they were using it to regain power.
Yeah.
Sarah came into it for very superficial reasons,
That
over
is
for
true.
love and for a
That
guy.
is true.
And it just seemed that the other ones took it more seriously and were really understanding what it means to be a coven and understanding that. And she comes in like, well, this is fun, but I really want the guy.
Right.
And in a way, she was trying to gain control of somebody too and trying to take away their free will by doing love magic or love spell. And so it just doesn't make sense how it ended that way. I was like, wow, this is very much like, I
Yes.
think personally, I think that overall, I like the craft. And I think for the most part, it did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
But in terms of like morality wise, I'm like, this is very like rainbows and lollipops at the very end.
It is. It is. Now there are things to be said like talk about pop culture. So like, remember they steal in the bookshop and they're like nature steals or like
Oh, yeah.
whatever or blah blah blah. So in our other location when we were on Lions, I remember catching these girls stealing crystals.
Oh
They
my
were
gosh,
putting
yeah.
crystals and I'm like, what the hell? And this bitch tried to the most. She tried to Nancy me. She was like, nature steals. I was like,
She said it?
Yeah, she told me nature steals. I'm like, bitch. Nature steals. I'm sorry. Are you a cheetah? Like trying to like steal the life of a little baby antelope so
you're a
you can
small-
live? Like we're a small business.
Yeah.
Like that Jasper, that huge ass chunk of Jasper is expensive.
So
Nature steals my
funny.
ass.
That is so fun. Well, you know, okay, so one of the questions on here was, you know, the portrayal of the craft and the chilling adventures of Sabrina. And we kind of did a really good segue into the craft. But okay, in the chilling adventures of Sabrina, I see something similar too, where it's like the three sisters and they're Sabrina. And they were
Right.
being mean to her too.
Yes.
So what is it with like the power of
Now
three?
here's my like issue with I think all witch movies.
Okay.
Including Harry Potter, which it's the chosen one.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you, I'm going to talk about Sabrina real quick. Well, I'm going to talk about Harry Potter real quick, and we're never going to talk about it again.
Yes.
Maybe if you have one question, we can talk about it. How this motherfucker did not get expelled from school really drives me crazy. And let me tell you, if there was one character that I am, it's Hermione.
Yeah.
Okay?
You think you're Hermione?
Oh, 100%. Except Hermione, like, I'm real Hermione.
I feel like I know
I would have told Tattletaled on that motherfucker 80 million times. Talk about, you know how like in Practical Magic, they're like, you can't practice witchcraft by looking your nose down at it. Like it's a quote.
Mm-hmm.
This motherfucker is late to class. This motherfucker steals books. He does half-thing spells. He's up all hours. Professor Magana Dumbledore doesn't give a fuck. He is just doing the most. He annoys me to no end. Sabrina annoys me to no end. She's like, I'm 13, I'm a witch, I'm going to be in the House of Night, but I'm also going to go to my school, and I'm going to fuck up everyone's life with witchcraft, and I'm trying the most, and then I'm going to cry so you can gain sympathy on me. And then I'm going to change the religion of the world. And I'm going to do this. And this is how you do it. It's like, it's so extra.
But here's my thing with this. So, speaking about like perceptions of witchcraft in the mainstream, and we were talking about this earlier in the conversation of the podcast, where there's people out there that are very much ego driven. And do you think, and I don't know, this might be like out there, but do you think that in a way people that are young growing up watching these movies, witchcraft movies, and the chosen one mentality, do you think that they kind of internalize that? And so when they go into their practice, that's why they criticize everybody else.
You got to keep this clip because yes, yes. I think the majority of modern witches have a fucking Sabrina Harry Potter complex.
Absolutely.
Because
Sarah
I think
complex.
they watch these movies, Sarah complex. They watch these movies and they think they are the chosen ones. And they are going to do the most.
Yeah.
And they're going to do some crazy shit. The other day, I was teaching a candle magic class, and I had a Sabrina. And she's like, well, do you really need to? Do you want to teach the class? Do you want to teach the class? I feel that there is and I think you said something that's on the nose. It's ego-driven, which they really show in pop culture.
Yes.
But you cannot have that as part of a practice.
And this goes back to media literacy.
And you can't have a part of mediumship. You can't have it being part of a psychic. You can't have it being a tarot card reader. You cannot. Because if you are going to do a work with spirits, with nature, with these things, it's not about you.
It's not, no.
It can serve you to an extent, but everything is an exchange. And everything is good and take, give and take.
Right.
And I think people forget that. And honestly, I think one of the things that bothers me about Sabrina, and well, not Harry Potter because I don't know the mythology enough, but specifically Sabrina, is that she has these gifts, she has these powers, but I don't think she's grateful to have them. I think she utilizes them in a very selfish way.
Okay.
She is selfless in the sense that she wants to help her friends, but she is selfish in the sense that she is not going to do what it takes to do that magic.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So she doesn't really care about the natural order. What she cares about, I mean, honestly, they do it pretty well. Like, I think episode 2, right? Like, Harvey's brother dies or something and she resurrects him.
Something like that, yes.
And like, she, to me, it's doing the most. She is not caring about
the natural order. In exchange for, because this is one person.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
yes.
I mean, they do it, practical magic.
Yeah.
She's like, I need to bring this dude back. And they're like, we don't do that kind of magic. And she goes, and what happens? She brings him back and whatever. Now, unfortunately, with movies and TV shows, as much as they'll try to show like this is wrong or like this character is flawed.
To summarize this, right? I think that like there isn't enough education on witchcraft because of like the villainization of it. And I think that the people that do dabble in witchcraft, some people do it for amazing intentions. They want to uplift their community. They want to like dive back into their ancestral roots or what they know growing up. I know for Latinos, and not all of them, because some of them get mad when I say this, but like as a Latina, like I grew up with a lot of like folkloric magic, and things that it gets kind of disguised as religion, but it is a form of magic and spells.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think like it's interesting because you mentioned something in the beginning of the conversation of like your grandmother and your mom, and for me it was like my great aunt. She still has a botanica in South Central. Guys, I keep forgetting the name of it. My mom gave me the business card, so I'm gonna plug it in somewhere. But people ask me like, what botanica? I'm like, it's in South Central. I just don't remember the name of it. But anyway, so the thing is that I grew up with things like that too, and I think that's why I've always felt like I learned at a very young age to respect the energy around me too. And I just feel like westernized culture doesn't do that. Like, I'll give an example. Like, so for us, I'm Central American and like I said, Latina, and we don't do Day of the Dead like Mexicans do, but we have like an All Saints Day. I think that's how you translate it in English. And so we do go and decorate my grandpa's tombstone and we pay our respect. So like we have like a whole thing for the dead. And I don't think our society does that as much.
No.
And that's part of like the thank you and the energy around and anything like that. And so I know we're getting off topic here, but all this to say is that it's interesting because there's people like us that maybe have grew up with it, but then there's also people that watch Harry Potter, Sabrina,
Yes.
The Craft, and they're like, I want to be the chosen one. And
Right.
here's another thing. I know this isn't like the mediumship episode, but I keep bringing it in because I am a medium, right?
Yeah.
We're both psychic mediums essentially, and there are people that are like my gifts, and I'm like, but everyone can tap into it,
Mm-hmm.
like so when you say your gifts, why do you get to be the chosen one?
And right. And here's what I will say. So I always tell people this, like when I teach tarot or when I, do a divination class or witchcraft, the way that I see it is like witchcraft is a practice and a tool that's accessible to everyone,
Right.
right? But like learning the piano, not everyone is going to be Mozart.
Yeah. Right.
Some people will be more attuned to witchcraft than others.
Yeah, absolutely.
It will come naturally to them. They will retain knowledge easier. They will have an easier time doing spells. But I get very oomphed or like triggered when people are like, well, I'm a natural witch, right? Or like I'm a
Oh, yeah.
hereditary witch. And I was like, bitch, like, first of all, this is what I tell people. Everyone, if you go back, has pagan ancestors.
Right.
Everyone has some lineage of folk magic
Yeah.
in their practice. The other thing, too, is that, like, realistically, because I really do think people pop culture puts a lot of emphasis on covens and witchcraft families and things like that.
Right.
Realistically, there's not enough historical evidence to say that that's true. So when
Yeah.
people are like, I come from a long coven of witches, I'm like, show me. Because let me tell you, before the 60s, ain't no one was calling it a coven, and they weren't like, maybe they did gatherings, and ain't no one was really calling themselves a witch.
Well, there's also the fact that like covens were supposed to be a secret.
Yes.
So how do you
How do you know?
Yeah.
And my other thing too is that no matter how you slice it or dice it, and this is why I have an issue with like the pop culture, like white witch or like good witch, is that like witchcraft is and always will be kind of a nefarious negative term. Witches have reclaimed the word.
Yeah.
Okay. But the word was not meant or intended to have a positive outcome or effect.
Yeah.
So you do see people who say like there is historical evidence that says that Anglo English way where it means like wise or wise one, but it also means poisoner and hexer and like, and the word was meant to be a term of a derogatory term.
Yeah.
Always.
There's a lot of cleaner, quote unquote, cleaner terms now to like
Exactly.
steer away from what originally terms were back
Yes.
then.
And I think a lot of people fight to like promote that, like it actually meant this. And I was like, even if that is a root word, it is not what it was intended. So like, and this is where people get like, what? No woman in the 17th century was actively calling herself a witch.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
No one was publicly owning the word witch. In a positive light.
So it reinforces, like you were saying. So how do you know you come from a lineage of witches?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So do I think that you came from a line of folk practitioners? Probably.
Yeah.
Did they practice folk magic? 100%.
But-
Would they have called it witchcraft?
But you know
I don't
what?
know.
Like, so here's what I'm seeing in a movement too, and we've talked about this too off the podcast, which I'm glad we're having this conversation because manifestation.
Right.
That's the golden term right now that
Yeah.
everyone is using, but people forget to realize that manifestation, when you're doing like, so there's a popular one where it's like the 2-cup water method, where
Right.
you like, so there's this method where you put with a sticky note on 1 cup the things that like your current state of mind and like what you don't have, and then you pour it to the next cup, and that's what you want to bring in. That's a ritual.
That's a ritual. That's tools.
Yes.
That's
a spell.
witchcraft. That's a spell.
And it's a, so what's the term for that? So it's like the like
Sympathetic magic.
sympathetic magic.
Like represents like.
Yes.
And people are like, well, no, sympathetic or manifestation is not. I did write a book, Manifestation for Witches.
Oh, you did.
Yes.
We're gonna talk about his books towards the end too, you
Yeah,
guys. So
no.
hang out.
But I think people forget that. First of all, I hate when people call it the secret. Ain't no
What's
secret.
the secret?
Manifestation. When they remember, like, the book The Secret, they'll be like, oh, that's the
Oh,
secret. We have been manifesting for centuries. My belief, if there is a tool involved, it stops becoming manifestation and becomes a ritual or a spell or witchcraft.
right.
Because there's a tool. When
Now, can I
everyone's
say
making
something?
like vision boards.
I was gonna say, so when people, okay, so what do you think of like affirmations, chanting, and music? Because I just did a whole podcast on like Christopher Walken manifesting through music, and like could he have done it? And people are gonna have to watch that episode for that. But what do you think of using music to manifest
I mean, I
and
think it's
affirmations?
ritualistic. Like,
Okay.
I'm not gonna say that is witchcraft because to me, witchcraft is more like to me, witchcraft is like getting this box of Altoids and like saying, okay, Altoids are cold and minty, therefore I'm going to make it winter, or
Okay.
like something like that, or I'm gonna freeze this person out. So like because
Oh, I see
you're,
what you're saying.
do you get what I'm saying? Because it's a
Kind of
representation.
like
That was a
the two
really
cup
bad,
water method that I just said
right?
is in a way like a
Like a
spell. Yeah.
spell or ritual. I think, if he's using music to kind of meditate, that's still kind of ritualistic. So if they are so like someone was like, I'm doing a vision board because I want to get a new career and this is a car I want, blah blah. If I try to ever assimilate that or like compare that to witchcraft, they won't hear about it
Right.
because it is witchcraft, because
It's still
it is
villainized. I think manifesting is can be a form of quote unquote witchcraft. I
mm-hmm.
think that, like, I did a video on like the New Year's stuff that Latinos do or Latinas do and how that's like sympathetic magic. I
Yeah,
just think that like
absolutely.
even now people are still not educated enough on like what is considered quote unquote witchcraft. And
Right.
because there's a newer term, like we talked about this with necromancy. Let's
Yeah.
let's let's get into the hot topic of necromancy.
Ooh.
So you and I both talked about like how, for the most part, people that not every witch practices like psychic mediumship. There's
Mm-hmm.
a good handful of them. That's why you see them doing like tarot readings and stuff like that. But necromancy, I think, was one of the original words before mediumship became a
Absolutely.
coined term, and it's one of the cleaner terms. But I asked you, I'm like, do you think there's a difference? And you said no, and I said no, because I'm like, I don't
Right.
understand the difference, but can you explain why some people would think there's a difference?
1980s Dungeons and Dragons. Yeah,
For
the
real though.
character called the Necromancer. I mean, let's be real.
Yes, yes.
And in fantasy, a necromancer is someone who revives, reanimates, and brings back the dead. In fantasy. Now,
Yeah.
my definition of necromancy is anyone who works with, speaks with, or utilizes aspects of the dead.
Yeah.
And if you are reading cards, talking to the dead, you are doing
That's what I do.
necromancy. See?
That's what I do.
If you, like I throw bones, that is a form of necromancy.
Yeah.
I commune with spirits. I bring in spirits into my readings, whether it be for protection or to communicate. So that is a form of necromancy.
Yeah.
So like essentially like kind of like divination or looking through things, even if you were like necromancy goes as far as like even it's not talking to the spirit. Say that you're like I would like my ancestors. I'm gonna channel my ancestors. I'm gonna use the cards to give you a reading, to give Bob a reading, right? You're still doing necromancy because you're using or you're calling the energy of your ancestors.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so you said something where like it's like reanimating the dead, and I can definitely, and I said this out loud several times at this point, but like I think people kind of lose the interpretation of reanimation because we go back to pulp culture, we go back to the
Right.
media. Reanimate the way that people think of it through the media, it's like you're technically thinking of a zombie or Frankenstein. I'm not doing
Yes.
that. So
No.
like for example, an empath. If you guys don't know what an empath, like in this part of the community of an empath. An empath is someone that feels very deeply things that are living, things that are dead. And so that's one of the senses that they use to communicate with the dead. That's a reanimation because you're now
Absolutely.
reliving emotions of the dead. Smelling things, like people have smelled cigars. That's a
Absolutely.
reanimation of the dead. So that's how you're bringing it to life by saying the things that they would say if they were living, by experiencing their emotions, by smelling things. My mom would smell things, and I'm
Absolutely.
like, I don't know who that is. It ain't us. That's a reanimation of the dead. So this goes back to media literacy and witchcraft, and necromancy also has been dispelled as black magic too because
Oh,
of Dungeons and
absolutely.
Dragons and
Yeah.
media and
And also because um before, so if you look at the old terms of necromancy, it was also called, before it was spelled with a C, it was spelled with a G.
oh
So people were like, oh, well, that's black magic. And it's not. It's that the color black was associated with death and as well as fertility in life. And, due to translations and whatever, they changed it. But like necro is Greek, meaning death.
yeah
Mancy is divination and spirit working, kind of like fortune telling, but not. It's like divination. So if you are utilizing that thing, you are using necromancy. The other thing too, so like there was a woman who was like, "Oh, I got this tarot deck at a estate sale, and I did a cleansing, but I feel like there's something to it. I'm using it." And I was like, "Oh, you're doing a form of necromancy?" And she goes, "No, I'm not." And I was like, "If you are utilizing the energy of the person that was deceased in the cards, like, and you're not just using them as regular cards, if you're like, there's a spirit attached to this and you're harnessing that spirit
yeah
to read someone's cards, you are doing a form of
yeah
necromancy."
yeah
Now here's where I will say another reason where it's reanimate the dead, is that there is and I forget her name, so we'll have to Google, but there's a story of a woman who in ancient Rome, long story short, this guy wants to fight Caesar and he wants to know how to bring down Julius Caesar. So he goes to this woman, this necromancer, this witch, and asks how he can get help. And she lives in a cemetery and she digs up the remains of a man, a soldier, and she communicates with that soldier. Now, communicating with that soldier does not mean that the soldier has come alive
Right.
and is dancing and skipping. She's using the essence of the bones and the energy. So I think there's a lot to be said there too. But then people are like, "Oh, well, voodoo is necromancy," and I was like, "Voodoo is necromancy because they work with the dead."
Yeah.
But their concept of the zombie, as we talked about earlier, is very different
Right.
than the zombie of pop culture.
Right. Right. So, yeah. So I know this is like a very packed, a very packed discussion. So,
Damn, this podcast got lit.
I guess so. To wrap it up here, how do you bring awareness and stuff like that?
So there's not really like, it's interesting because I kind of see the other way, right? So I see elements of my practice in pop culture, not vice versa. But what I do see is honestly, like when I teach classes, I'll pull up a clip. I'll be like, "Look,
Mm.
this is a very honest concept of like for example, I will use Sarah's spell to make Chris fall in love with her as a cautionary tale.
Oh, okay.
If you are not specific,
Mm-hmm.
this can happen to you.
Okay. Yeah,
You
that's
know,
good.
I will use in practical magic, they do a lot of New England folk magic that is actually traditional.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll bring that up and I'll be like, look, so like the broom falling means something, the circle around the moon that
Mm-hmm.
they mentioned. So all those things have a basis in my practice, and you can see that in there. So like honestly, like I really feel like for anyone getting into witchcraft, or like if they're influenced by pop culture, what I started doing when I was watching these shows is I would pause and I would look it up.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'd be like, where is the truth in this?
Okay.
You
Okay.
know?
No, I
And
like
that
that.
can open up a lot of doors. So obviously check your resources, because make sure
As
it's
we said
not some
earlier.
girl on Reddit.
So I think we've kind of hit full circle this conversation, and just to kind of wrap this up, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me on the gram at Mystic Dylan Official. You can follow my shop at Wolf and Jackal. And then my books are on Amazon if you type in Mystic Dylan.
Yeah, I'm gonna link your most recent book. Can you?
Yes.
It's what's the most recent
It's
book?
Throwing Bones.
Throwing Bones. Speaking of
Yeah,
necromancy.
and there's actually a section called
Oh, that's
Necromancy
cool.
in
That's
there, and it gives other forms of divination, playing cards, throwing bones, pendulum.
Oh,
So
exciting.
yeah, it comes out April 8th.
I'm gonna put that link in the description. So,
Yes.
all right. Well, thank you for being part of this episode.
Thank you, Stephanie Strange.
And remember, guys, stay strange.
Stay strange.
All right, guys, this wraps up the podcast, but I did want to say a final note before we end it officially. And make sure that you guys write to me your scary stories or paranormal stories for Strange Sundays at shareyourspookystory at gmail.com. The information will be in the description below. And remember to give me 5-star reviews. This helps push out the podcast. And I hope to get a team to help support this podcast so we can get a lot of more goodies and higher quality content for you guys. So please give me 5-star reviews, share it with a friend who loves the paranormal and the metaphysical. And until next time, you guys, remember to stay strange.